Folks at home, welcome back to the Crimson Oak Pond, and it is bulking season for the tiger bass here in the 5-acre pond. And today we're going to be stocking 5,000 of these jumbo shrimp, known as freshwater prawns, into our pond. But the beauty of these prawns is that in about 4 months they can reach adult size and are basically the equivalent of a jumbo shrimp. And some of the adults can exceed 12 inches in length. And the main reason we're stocking these in the 5-acre pond is because we can't add crawfish in there because they would burrow through the pond dam. And as you can see, these jumbo prawns are a huge protein snack for the bass. And a big reason that these bass went from 2 inches long to some of them pushing 7 pounds in less than 3 years. So what you see here is the average size adult prawn that we grew. And it took about 5 months. And we would release some of them right here on the pond's edge, but a lot of them got put in at night and were an easy meal for the bass under the green lights. So it's time to restock the prawns. So this year we're going to be raising them in 4 different bodies of water. The 5-acre pond, Cedar Falls, a holding tank, and this small body of water known as the wetland filter. And the wetland filter is our filtration system for Cedar Falls. We had a lot of fun last year watching them interact with our smallest bass, Truman. The second spot will be the main pool of water at Cedar Falls, which should get interesting because we have a smallmouth bass in there this year. And we're also going to stock some in the 5-acre pond, but the ultimate goal is to grow these out in the wetland filter in Cedar Falls and move them to the 5-acre pond. And our shipment just came in of 5,000 post-larva prawns. And you can see these are juveniles. And when they're first born, they're about 1/8 of an inch long. But we feed them a heavy protein diet and they'll reach adult size in only 4 months. The only difficulty with raising prawns is making sure their water temperature doesn't get too low, because they can't survive in anything below the mid-50s. And the other really important aspect of raising prawns is making sure they have plenty of water to move around in. Because after all, they are cannibals with a big appetite and will begin eating each other if they outgrow their water space. So the first place we're going to stock them is here in Cedar Falls. And if you notice, the main pool of water is pretty clear with a bunch of rocks and gravel. But over here at the intake bay for the wetland filter, you can see we have a little bit of algae down there in the rocks. And that's a perfect place to add the prawns because they feed on that algae and it also provides them an extra spot to hide. Alright, so we're adding about 1,000 of them here. And you can see the little guys immediately start scooting around, checking out their new home. And just like we expected, several of them began feeding on the algae right away. And one other spot they really like are hard surfaces like the rocks, especially if it has any kind of growth or decaying matter on it. They love moving up and down in the water column on those vertical pieces. Now for the second spot, we're adding them to the wetland filter, and just like the main body of water, it has some of that filamentous algae that'll help them out in that juvenile stage. So we got roughly 1,000 added in here, and we're seeing the same thing where they're moving over to the algae and rocks. But look who's lurking back there in the background. Our small bass named Truman. If you're going to eat these, you better catch them quick, because they're going to outgrow you in no time. Alright, now the third spot we're adding them is in the 5-acre pond, and the only reason I'm doing this now is because we finally have some vegetation in these shallow pockets for them to hide in. And that's important because if we didn't, most of these small little guys would get eaten in a matter of days by all the bluegills. But we put another 1,000 in, you guys better run and hide quick. Alright, and last but not least, we're setting up a holding tank where the remaining 2,000 are going to live. And I like filling this tank up with water directly out of the 5-acre pond because it's fertile water and already has that plankton bloom in it. You can see it's clean water, it just has that green tint from the phytoplankton. And the last thing they need is some good bubbles. I prefer these circular discs, and I'll put a couple of them in here, which gives them plenty of aeration. So now that the oxygen is in place, let's add 2,000 post-larva prawns. And they immediately went to the side. But the reason I always put some in a holding tank is because I can feed these a heavy dose of protein pellets every day, which will make sure they get the growth they need, and it's really easy to transport these into the 5-acre pond. And check this out. I was trying to see if these two guys were either hung up in a spider web or were eating the spider web, and I'm not going to lie, I was so focused that I got a little spooked when the creator of the spider web snuck up on me. Wasn't expecting that. He got me. Alright, and as I mentioned, it is bulking season here at the Crimson Oak Pond, and those prawns are going to take a little too long to grow, and we needed a food source that was a little quicker, so we're going to add 10,000 threadfin shad. And if you pay close attention, you'll also see some shell cracker, which will help out with that snail problem we were having last winter. But I'll usually stock threadfins 2 to 3 times throughout the season. Because of all the bait fish, they're extremely finicky, and it's just hard to keep a healthy population of them. But for you pond owners out there, the key to stocking threadfin shad is to try to get them in before the May shad spawn. Because if you time it just right, the 10,000 shad you put in will spawn and could become 100,000 shad, and that's the way to achieve that healthy population. But as we were dumping them, you see there's a variety of sizes, from those small 2 to 3 inch shad all the way up to the adults that are ready to spawn. And while I typically prefer the larger threadfins for spawning reasons, I do like these mixed batches because the smaller shad will feed those second and third generation bass and help them put on some weight. But now that we're in the 3rd year since the bass were added, I am noticing that the dynamics of the bass are changing. And I'm going to pan around and show some feeding clips right after we get the shad added. And if you pay attention, you'll see we're getting some topwater strikes, but it's from those smaller 2nd and 3rd generation bass. And what really clued me in on this change was the fish stocking we did this past November. We added a truckload of adult golden shiners that averaged 5 to 6 inches in length. And that was the wildest fish stocking I'd seen. When you panned around the lake, there were literally shiners jumping out of the water in every direction running from the bass. So all of the 3, 4, and 5 pound bass prefer that bigger style bait now, and when they saw it, it really got them motivated to attack. And don't get me wrong, a 4 pound bass will still eat one of these threadfin shad, but it just doesn't motivate them like the big shiners do. So for that reason, we're going to stock a truckload of big golden shiners next week, which will also take some of the pressure off these threadfins and allow more of them to survive and make it to that spawning date. And I'm also going to be adding some more structure and treetops along the shallow parts of the pond later in this video, which is also going to help out with their survival rate. Alright, now let's go check in on Cedar Falls. And we had some more spawning activity over here in this lily pot. You can see there's one of the female bass that have been fanning it out. But so far, no bass fry in the pond this year. But the bass in this pond always love to see me show up because they know it's going to be feeding time. We got the whole crew here today, even the spotted bass and the smallmouth. That's some happy bass there. Alright, time to toss some golden shiners in, and you're going to see some incredible topwater shots today. And I'm going to admit, as much as I love the 5 acre pond, I'm so happy that we built Cedar Falls because I get so much enjoyment out of having this clear water and being able to come over and interact with these bass every day. And you really do learn so much more about them just by being able to see them. And we talked a lot about this in our last video where we located Bonnie and Clyde. And we had grown attached to them because they were basically our pets for about 3 to 4 years. And when you put them in the 5 acre pond with that stained water, it's easy to go a year before you ever see them again. And that brings me to a tough decision because we've got some big changes going on with our backyard pond that I'll be telling you guys about in the next video. But now we have to make that decision of where we're going to move Moby, either here into this clear water pond, Cedar Falls, or into the 5 acre pond. And just like with Bonnie and Clyde, I'm a little torn because we built that 5 acre pond. So if we did release one of these bass in it, it would have plenty of water to roam around in and live to its fullest potential. But I've seen firsthand how once you release them, it's probably going to be a long time before you see them again. And of all the bass that we've raised, I'll have to say that Moby's special. We knew that with him from day one. And so the selfish side of me wants to add him here in Cedar Falls to continue watching him grow and seeing those big blow-ups. So folks, leave me a comment down below and let me know if we should release Moby here in Cedar Falls or in the 5 acre pond. But the one good thing about Cedar Falls is even though it's a good bit smaller than the 5 acre pond, it's still 30,000 gallons with tunnels and big boulders and hiding spots. So it's still plenty enough room for a bass to roam around and not feel like it's cramped or fish crowded. But there's also a really good chance that we're going to remove some of these smaller bass that were born right here in Cedar Falls and move them over to the 5 acre pond. Because if you guys recall, we also have a big slab crappie that we call Outlaw and a couple other giant bluegills. And so we're going to add some diversity to Cedar Falls and hopefully get a few more species swimming around in here. Alright, now that Operation Vulcan season has officially begun, there's one last small bass that has to eat. And that's little Truman in the wetland filter. We're going to toss him a couple big shiners in, and he wastes no time going to eat them. So now I'd like to tell you guys a story about the day I learned of the importance of water quality. And this story involves the world's most aggressive bass that we call Moby. And we raised Moby in an aquarium since he was a little bass fry, and he always had the biggest appetite of any fish I've ever seen. Well, one night during our routine feedings, we added some golden shiners to the aquarium, and he wouldn't eat. And this was very rare, because most of the time, he'd strike them before they even fell into the water. So this went on for a couple of days, and he wouldn't touch the shiners. And at that point, we realized that we had missed one of the water changes that we would routinely do on the aquariums. So we pumped about 75% of the water out of his tank, and the moment that we filled it back up with clean, fresh water, he immediately went over and ate those shiners. And at that moment, I knew that water was a lot more complex than just the clear liquid you can see with your eyes. And that's when I took a deep dive into water quality and studied everything I could find about how water parameters affect ponds and fish. And I got several different test kits so that I could test our water. And for instance, with a 5-acre pond, alkalinity is one of those key parameters. And if it's below 20 parts per million, you add lime to raise it over that threshold, and then follow it up with fertilizer that'll give it that nice plankton bloom and fertile pond that supports more fish and also makes them bigger. And for our other pond, Cedar Falls, it was the exact opposite. We built a 10,000-gallon wetland filter with aqua blocks and tons of stones to help filter all the particles out of that water and make it crystal clear and turn it into a complete ecosystem pond. And that's about the time I started thinking, well, I'm going to all these extremes to make sure that these fish have optimal water, but what about the water that me and my family drink? Because even I'm adding things like lime and fertilizer to a water source, and although we're not drinking out of the pond, it's very common that things like fertilizer and other chemicals seep down through the ground and into a drinkable water source. And that led me down a different rabbit hole, and I found several sources and articles that show just how bad the water that comes out of our sink can be. And there are websites online that you can type in your zip code and it'll show you exactly which contaminants are in your sink water. And I found that one of the best ways to remove these contaminants is through a process called reverse osmosis. And there's a water filtration device made by Cove Pure that uses a 4-stage filtration process. And in stage 1, it traps things like rust, sand, and other large particles. And stage 2 removes harmful chemicals like VOCs, pesticides, chlorine, and microplastics. And for stage 3, the reverse osmosis, that removes thousands of contaminants like lead, arsenic, and forever chemicals. And for the final stage, alkaline. That's where it returns those beneficial minerals like calcium and magnesium to make sure you have balanced, healthy water. So even though Cove Pure is third-party lab tested and verified to remove 99.9% of the contaminants, you know me, I had to do some tests of my own. So I decided I was going to test chlorine, and I started out by filling up one glass with sink water and then another glass directly from the Cove Pure filtration system. And the glass of sink water is here on the left, and the test was simple. Add 5 drops of the solution to each cup, and if the water turns yellow, that indicates it has chlorine in it. And there you go, folks. That's pretty clear results. So very impressive. Cove Pure completely removed all the chlorine out of the water. But there's several other things I really like about this system. The first is that you can instantly have hot or cold water just by changing the setting. You can also customize the amount of water it dispenses. But the most impressive feature is that it has a built-in sensor that measures the total dissolved solids. So the raw TDS is the amount of solids in the incoming water, and the pure TDS shows the solids in the filtered water. But it also has a removable pitcher, so we even use it for the water that we cook with, as well as filling up the coffee pot. So a big shout out to Moby for teaching me the importance of water quality, and clean drinking water really is one of the most important investments you can make for your family's health. So if you guys want to check them out, you can click the link in the video description or go to covepure.com/BamaBass and get $200 off. So do me a favor and go check them out. So we're going to add a new part to this pond series where we travel around and visit other ponds and lakes and interview the owners to find out what were the successes and failures that they had with their pond and kind of pool all of this information together to help me as well as you guys learn about different bodies of water and different pond management techniques. Because over the years I've gotten some really good ideas from you guys, and I'm sure that some of you that have watched our videos have implemented some of this into your ponds. For instance, we did some traveling this past weekend, and this guy has the same exact hatchery pond set up where he's got this small body of water about 1/4 of an acre, and he grows out his threadfin shad, and then once they become adults, he opens up the valve and flushes them right down into his big lake. And his advice for doing this was make sure that your hatchery pond is at a higher elevation, so when you do open up that valve, gravity's going to help you drain it. But the main goal for this is sharing all the knowledge that we've learned, the successes and failures, because as you all know, every pond is unique, and if there's one thing that's guaranteed, it's going to come with a handful of challenges. But the next pond we visited was hands down one of the most beautiful ponds I'd ever been to. If I could draw up the way a pond should look, this was it. It had standing timber, brush piles, cattails lining the bank, but one major problem, and that was that this water was crystal clear. And it's rare to see a pond with 20-foot plus visibility this far south. And I wish I would have had my drone so you could see the full extent of it. But this water was gin clear, and we all know what comes with clear water, and that is an abundance of algae growth. So I think that the mistake this particular pond owner made was adding fertilizer after the algae was already present. And it makes sense if you think about it. He was wanting to add fertilizer to darken the water and reduce the sunlight's penetration, which would in turn remove that algae. But the big problem is that if you already have a significant amount of algae, whenever you add that fertilizer, it's just like a crop. You're feeding it and it's going to grow very, very fast. And the more that the algae grows, the more food it requires, and it begins taking all of the nutrients out of the water, making it crystal clear. So the best practice for adding fertilizer is remove the algae first, and then work on that plankton bloom. But if you also notice during some of these feeding clips, you'll see those big adult gizzard shad. And these gizzard shad may have been introduced to this pond a little too early, because if you compare them to the size of the bass that are swimming here, they're basically the same size. So if a bass isn't able to eat the gizzard shad, they're just going to be competing with the bluegills and other small fish in the pond, and basically just taking up space and resources, because they also eat the protein pellets and get big quick. So with gizzard shad, it's important to have an abundance of 5, 6, and 7 pound largemouth bass before you ever introduce them, because those size fish will always keep the gizzard shad numbers in check. But I want you guys to let me know what you think about this new idea. If you're interested in us traveling around and visiting other ponds, or if you'd prefer us to just stick with the farm and the couple ponds we have there. Alright, now let's check in on the eagles. We got Daddy Eagle sitting up high, trying to locate a bluegill. And now he's flying back over to the nest where they successfully had 2 babies earlier this year. And you can see the mama eagle up high in the right, on guard duty, as the 2 babies are sleeping in the nest. But they're not going to be babies much longer because they are getting big quick. You can see one of these guys is starting to branch out and getting ready for his flight wings, but his sibling has already learned how to fly. And that's the one that just flew into the nest. And I could be wrong, but I'm almost certain he went on his first hunt, and he looks pretty excited that he actually captured something. And it's pretty small, I can't tell exactly what it is, but he's hopping up and down, excited about it, and also excited that he's finally able to use those wings. And I will have to say, filming these babies has not been easy. I've spent a lot of time behind the camera just watching 2 eagles sleeping in a nest. So whenever you actually do finally get a cool shot like this, it makes all those hours worth it. But I haven't seen him fly over to the 5-acre pond yet, and I'm sure that's coming soon. And while we're on the topic of birds, we had a few new ducks show up this week, and I was excited because at first I thought it was one of our ducks we call Echo or Romeo, and they had recently flown off with some other ducks a few weeks back. And so when I saw the darker duck, I thought it could possibly be Echo, but once I got zoomed in, it looks like a different species to me. Maybe some of you duck guys can comment below what kind of species we have out here today. Alright, now it's time to get an update on the shop build. So in this office space area, we're going to do a wooden accent wall, and the guys have almost finished up with it. I think it's looking pretty good. Now they're getting the last one set. And look at the finished product. Man, I think that turned out great. Not something you see every day. Get all your walls built and then start cutting holes through them. But we had to add a return air vent right here. We got power and air on this week, making a lot of progress. Floors coming next. Now the power company came through and had to trim some of the tree limbs, but you know me, we're not going to let those go to waste, as we've got them piled up right here on the pond's edge. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to sink some brush piles in tops to help all of these bait fish and threadfin shad make it to spawning season. Got another pile of them on the bank over there. And my technique is very simple. Just set a block on the front of the boat, pull a thin piece of wire or metal through, and then take your trees, stack them on top, wrap your wire around, twist it up, just like this one. Then you got a nice little fish habitat in here. So for the first one, we're not going far. Like I mentioned, we're going to set these out in all the shallow areas. And the one thing I like to do with the shallow treetops is sink them where just a little bit of the tree is still sticking out of the water. That way the fishermen can easily locate them in the future. Alright, the next spot we're going is down here in the corner of the dam where I know a lot of fish hang out. Got it in just like we want it. Now the next spot we're going to go over here by Alcatraz Island. We put Christmas trees out here every year. So we got a lot of wood out here, but we know it's one of those heavily populated areas. Alright, and the last spot today is going to be out in front of one of the bluegill feeders. So over the past couple of weeks we had a tremendous amount of rain, and so I'm having to apply some more fertilizer because the problem with a good plankton bloom is it all sits up on the surface. So with all the heavy rains, when water begins overflowing out of the pipe, it often takes a lot of that good plankton bloom with it. So you can see we still have that greenish tint to the water, but I was measuring around 28 inches of visibility, and I like to keep it between 18 and 26. And if you saw all the tadpoles in the last video, this little guy is the result of one of them. First time ever using those legs. He hadn't quite got it down yet. There you go, buddy. Quick learner. So I've been walking around the pond's edge, and I'm starting to see several schools of those thread fins we put in. They're a schooling type of fish and are always going to group up together. And I got this new little buddy that hangs out over in this shallow grass, and he's not scared of me at all. But this little guy stands out because he has a little bit lighter color than the rest of the bass. But I like watching him because he scans all of these bluegills and shad as they swim by, waiting on that perfect size. And then he goes into attack mode. But if you want to see some fireworks, just go hang out around one of the bluegill feeders this time of year. You're almost guaranteed to see a flying bluegill. And these bass are aggressive. But if you think about it, this is the time of year that there's the least amount of other bait fish for the bass to eat. Because tilapia don't survive the winter, all your prawns from last year have been eaten, and your threadfin count's at its lowest right about now. So unfortunately for the bluegills, they become the target. And man, I wouldn't want to be the target of one of these bass. And not to mention they also have the aerial assault from the eagles. So it's a tough life for those little guys right now. But if they didn't have enough predators to worry about, one additional one's going to come in as Mr. Longneck's going to show up to the feeding. And this guy cracks me up. He walks with his head tilted sideways. And the first time I watched this clip, I was so focused on the heron that I didn't even see the big bass blow up in the background. I had to do a double take, and yep, that one got knocked about 2 feet up into there. So if you missed the last video, we talked a lot about this big bass that hangs out up under the dock. That could have potentially been Bonnie, but it didn't have a name, so we named it Ghost. And the interesting thing about this fish is that it's never bitten an artificial lure. So I was tossing some shad in midday, trying to get her to come up. And when I started dropping those jumbo shiners in, and we got to see that big girl inhale one of those big baits. Man, that was awesome. But now I'm out here sitting on the dock right before dark. Time to feed these bass. And I'm feeding them these jumbo golden shiners that they call brooders. And sometimes it's hard to get your hands on them, but usually a few different times of the year you can get truckloads of them delivered. And that's the most cost-effective way of doing it. You can get small boxes shipped in, and that works for small feedings. But if you're trying to feed a pond full of bass, the fish trucks are definitely the way to go. Alright, now let's check in on the swamp cameras. And my goodness, we must be having a reunion down there. I think every deer at the farm is eating at the swamp right now. And hey, look at there. The bucks are finally starting to shed their antlers. Although he's the first one I've seen to drop. Usually they start dropping them in late April and throughout May. And got the whole herd back out here again. And we got the raccoon here, heading into work. And some does splashing around in the creek. Check out that doe in the back, standing up on her back 2 feet. There must have been some good tasting leaves that high. And now we got Flip-Flop, the floppy-eared deer. And the other raccoon woke up late and now in a hurry to get to work. And some more deer munching on the leaves. This is why you don't see them much this time of year. They have all the food sources they need right there in their bedding areas. Uh-oh, I think we've been discovered. One of the little fawns is becoming a buck. You can see the little knots on his head. Look at that. Whenever that one deer jumped over the log, it spooked the other one. Got him. Mr. Raccoon heading back home after a long day of work. And we got Chip and Dale playing hide and seek. Alright, now let's check in on Bonnie's Bayou. We got the raccoons, and this is part of their long day of work. Raiding the duck house. I think this is a young blue heron that hadn't quite learned the techniques of stealth just yet. Now that he's slowed down, he's much more successful. Hey there, got a couple geese. And a cool shot of the blue heron right at sunset. Alright, I just added some protein pellets in there for the prawns. I feel like these little guys are just as aggressive as the tiger bass. They always attack their food quick. You can even see we got multiple shrimp on those pellets. That shows just how tiny they are, at about 1/8 of an inch. Alright, time to do a little fishing and see if the fish have moved into these treetops that we just put out. We are going to swim a little bluegill that looks pretty realistic out there by them, or buzz this little toad right over the top of them. And if we catch any, we'll scan them to see if they have a pit tag and update them in the database. Whoa. That was incredible. Somebody's got my drag set way too loose. Look at there, there's another one up there trying to eat it. Man, that was wild. We got us a frog eater. Wow, fish got no tag in it. Man, that's a nice one for no tag. Alright, its new tag is 2233087. And it weighs 2.46. Alright, we gotta set the drag because for whatever reason it was completely loose. But I know there's another bass down there because he came in and ripped the legs off that last frog. Alright, gonna try out the bluegill. Oh yeah, on the bluegill. That's that other one that wanted to eat that frog. Oh, he got off. Man, that was a nice one. Close. Got the teeth marks. That's what we want to see right there. Big blow up. Another frog eater. Alright, this fish been caught 570873 and weighs 1.89 pounds. Alright, this fish is named Gabe. Most likely a male bass. You can see it hadn't gained much weight, but likes to hang out right there around the big feeder. Holy cow. Man, right at the bank. He grabbed the feet instead of the body. Smaller guy. Still wanted that frog. Alright, this is a new one. Has not been caught. New tag is going to be 2234095. Weighing in at 1.63 pounds. There we go. A big one. Yes, sir. It's one of them first generation females. Nice one. That's what we're after. Look at all that green right there on the top of it. Alright, this one's been caught 570878. And she weighs 2.62. And this fish is named King Kong. The third time we caught it, and it gained about 1 pound in the last year, and is a sucker for chatterbaits. Got him. Another nice one. This one's been caught 571341, weighing in at 2.40 pounds. And we have the king of the north, John Snow. It's the 7th time we've caught John, and the 3rd time we've caught him this year. He's an aggressive one. Now let's go check in on the deer feeder cams. And we got an old bobcat. That's a big one. And this buck still has his antlers. And there's one of the bigger bucks on the property. He's an 8 or 9 point. Still hanging around. The herd of mamas came through. And all the deer and raccoons out feeding after that monsoon of a rainstorm we had. And there's the big boy. And there's the fawn with the small little nubs, wishing the rain would go away. And a half rack. Mr. Raccoon's trying to carb up after a long day at work. Now he's headed to get some sleep before the sun comes up. And I wanted to take a second to tell you all Happy Easter. Oliver had a good time out here finding those Easter eggs. And even found the big golden one blindfolded. Alright folks, if you made it this far in the video, make sure to hit that subscribe button to follow along with all these ponds, tiger bass, and bald eagles. But I hope y'all enjoyed this one, and we will see you all next time.